the new idea of health maxing. Now, it might not be a new idea, but combining these two things, I think might be to a certain extent at least a new idea. It's the idea to create maximum health. Now, what is maximum health? It's the best health one can get. It's the maximum health. Now, maximum is basically just describing, or the word maximum is describing a function which maximizes something. Now, the problem with many different metrics is that they are not to be maximized, but they have a local optimum, which means they sometimes might be sort of, it could also be that in the spectrum of a metric, for example, let's take a certain blood marker, minimum is not, so minimizing a blood marker might not be the function one is searching for, but keeping it in the optimal range. But then one could further define down the optimal range, and maybe one in the future might have an even more optimal range. Maybe there might be even an optimal value, at least for a given time stamp, basically. So in the morning, the optimal value for my testosterone might be this, but then in the evening, because it naturally fluctuates up and down, the optimal value might be this. So actually, it is a lot more complicated. It seems to be a lot more complicated often than just to try to maximize something, to minimize something, or to find a local optimum. Now, or the optimum of the function in general. There might be also local optimi, but now back to the health maximizing. Now recently in the last couple of years, I try to maximize my health basically. There are many different areas to this. I want to mention a few. First, I want to get rid of my allergies. Now I again am kind of into taking two different things, and this is now so nice, I think. So in the past, I did take injections for every 4 weeks, basically one injection in one arm. I think at some point did even two, or I'm not entirely sure. I think I only did one. Basically, I have allergy, and if there are pollen outside, then I react to them slightly. I also have an allergy to a different kind of pollen, tree pollen. So now in the past, I took injections. It was very hard to just go to the doctor, and the time cost and so on and so forth. And also, there is only a slight effect. And the slight effect, now, if I compare this to playing the piano, if I compare this to how long it took me to kind of build some reasonable amount of muscle, then these were like 16 years in this case. If I compare the time investment, compare it to this other thing, which would be having allergy, then maximizing my health now would apply to this, as in, again, picking up something like this. And what I recently discovered is that the immunotherapy that is now available, or hyposensitivity, there is a German word for it, but I don't know if it translates to English. So the immunotherapy I now can do is allowing me to have 2 tablets sublingually, and that's it. So basically I just have to take them once a day. So what this would potentially allow me in the future to have maybe 0.1% less allergy on a given day, or 1% less allergy over a given year, or something like this. So it basically allows me to have better sleep in the future, for example. This would be just one example of this, because sleep or pollen rhinitis, that would basically prevent but good quality sleep, because I'm like sneezing 15 times or 30 times in an hour in a night. Now this would be one side. The second side of this would be trying to maximize the values, or trying to optimize rather, the values that I already can measure to a certain extent. There are different kinds of values. Let's think of them as continuous on a maybe time interval basis, and that's already it. Of course, the continuous time interval is also to a certain extent a time interval. It is just kind of the derivative, the marginally small derivative of something. Now, in terms of optimizing metrics now, one could think of the metrics one can measure, and I currently measure metrics on 2 watches. Mostly I'm thinking of maximizing my Garmin dashboard at this point in time. I do have additionally to my Garmin watch, which is a Fenix 7S Pro, a scale from Garmin, the Garmin S2, and the Garmin Index S2, and the Garmin Index BPM, which is the blood pressure monitor. Now, there would be additional things which I would be interested in, such as a chest strap, such as a power meter for my bike. It also would be nice if the gym I visit actually would have power meters on their bikes, which would connect to Garmin, which would then allow me to have a power to weight ratio, and also this cycling value, which is called FTP, I think, and also measured on a continuous basis. Currently, I do have the measurements that happen on my watch, which are resting heart rate, so I have a yearly resting heart rate average of 48, and I specifically took this larger time frame because there seems to be a variability of also resting heart rate throughout the year. A couple of weeks ago, for example, I went as low as, for the weekly average, as 38, and during the day I took a nap and my heart rate was as low as 33, and I then actually was still awake and I saw the 33 and I took a screenshot of this. Now I don't know what the minimum heart rate was when I was awake. Actually, I should have taken notes, but it also was maybe like 36, I think I achieved once while basically being conscious and also being, well, awake, which would then be my minimum resting heart rate. I could also take a look at the minimum resting heart rate that Garmin or also Samsung actually calculated. So in terms of now why heart rate, why resting heart rate, it seems to be that there are two main markers that one could somewhat easily measure and also on a continuous basis, which would predict mortality. The first one, that's kind of the best marker it seems, is VO2 max. Now Garmin creates a VO2 max estimate, and mine is currently, as of today, it has increased to 59. Now, the rough formula I've made now is that I take 50 years, I assume I live 50 healthy years, so basically in a state similar to what I am now. Of course now my lifespan might be different, but I assume 50 healthy years, and then I basically take my VO2 max and I deduct the 50 healthy years, and basically every point of VO2 max I have above, on top, basically above the 50, is giving me another year to live. Which is kind of a gamified and also super simplified system, which is probably not that accurate. Nonetheless, I now have this Garmin VO2 max estimate on my watch, and every time I take a look on my watch, I can not only see the time, but I can also kind of see my remaining time, at least if I follow these assumptions. I can also see my 7-day resting heart rate, but I unfortunately cannot get the yearly resting heart rate onto here. Currently, it's a little bit lower compared to my yearly resting heart rate, but it has increased in the last couple of weeks as I overconsumed in calories and also carbs. Now, there are other things I can measure, such as my blood pressure. I can then have a readout. In this case, there is no average readout any longer, maybe because there is too much variance. Similar to resting heart rate, one might have to measure maybe throughout the day and then find the minimum value and then call it something like resting blood pressure in order to then have something that is comparable from one day to the next. And so maybe for this reason, many different apps, also Garmin, not also Garmin, but Samsung also took out the average calculation, which I previously used in order to input it into a different biological age calculator, which is the one that my gym made available to me via the app, and this is made by company eGym. So in this case, there is a metabolic age, there is a cardiovascular age, there is a strength age, which is also measured in part by automated machines. So there are machines in the gym. You enter basically your height, and it also measures, I think, your height. And so basically you take this measurement before you also enter your height and your weight, but you can also measure at the station your weight and then also your body composition. And then you can do 1-rep max tests. You can also do exercise on these, but I rarely do this because there are pauses in between, which I try to avoid in the gym. I often do supersets, switching between two exercises. So at this, I can basically measure my strength and then measure my strength age. I can also input different exercises. So these would also be values I can therefore input, which result in a biological age, and the biological age then needs to be ideally minimized. So basically health maxing in this case is minimizing the biological age, which so maximizing, so making more of something or making less of something, are functions that are very easy to comprehend and understand. So by taking biological age and by saying the younger the better, one is basically allowing this somewhat easy understanding of functions like these, and therefore it allows to gamify the thing better compared to, okay, I need to find this optimal value that is in between this range, but over time this range might change because then we might have more data on the population and so on and so forth. So I try to reduce my cardiovascular age by inputting a VO2 max estimate, which is higher and higher and higher. Then I try to ideally reduce my resting heart rate, because this seems to correlate then with better, with a lower mortality. In this case, it seems to get the metabolic, not the metabolic, but the cardiovascular age down. Then there is also another input in terms of the cardiovascular age, which we can see if we click on this cardio age here. And then the third entry is the blood pressure. Now, unluckily, one could say, I do no longer have an average. So what I do is once a week, when I input also these other values, and I also take my blood pressure on a daily basis, so I just input the daily blood pressure just as a kind of proxy for this. Previously I used the yearly average, but currently I cannot do this any longer because I also switched to Garmin. Previously I had an Omron Evolve, which allowed me to take the yearly average because the app computed the yearly average. Now, or calculated the yearly average. There is also a flexibility age, which is measured by standing with a stick and doing various stretches in front of this, and then it measures the angle, for example, by which your arms move back. And well, there are some angles which are better, or if you can flex more, stretch more, then it is better. Then we also have the strength age, which I already mentioned. The cardiovascular, the metabolism is measured by mostly standing on an in-body scale, which is a body composition scale. I also input my waist and my hip measurements, which I also take on a weekly basis. So the idea is to basically minimize the biological age that I can measure or get measured or get approximated in the various apps or services that are available. I also took a test with Insight Tracker, which also gave me a biological age, but unfortunately it was very high with 37 point something. Now, basically I can, of course now, these are only proxies. These are my biological age, my biological strength age is not actually 38 and then it's this and then it's this and then it's this. Of course it also depends largely. If I, for example, would run today in the evening compared to today in the morning with filled glycogen stores, with being maximally regenerated, then my Garmin VO2 max estimate based on this run would also be lower. The question is obviously when do you take these tests and so on and so forth, and in terms of inputting different exercises from the gym, I'm kind of unsure when I should input them. Should I input them right away? It's also a manual input, so this maybe should be something that is automated in order to gamify it better, to say, okay, this value I created here is actually a standardized value, and it's not just me thinking about, okay, how can I game this system by maybe putting in my best value over the last couple of months and then not inputting a value if I have worse deadlift, for example. Not that the deadlift can be the deadlift is not something that can be used as an exercise input, but there are other exercises like doing push-ups and how many push-ups can you do, which could be used. Now, health maxing sounds also ridiculous. There is also something else I wanted to discuss, which I might make a different video about, which is that my intelligence seems to be largely dependent on how healthy my body is. So, if, for example, I would be in the same state I am in the first 90 minutes after waking, if I had a full night of very good sleep, then I would be probably above in terms of intelligence, above the average of what I currently am in terms of intelligence. And if I spend my whole life in kind of the last 2 hours of the day, or in the state in which I am usually in the last 2 hours of the day right before I fall asleep, then I might be less intelligent. One could also say, not in terms of intelligence, but also maybe including the body in this and not just the mind, it would be alert and tired. But the problem with these two is that, so there is alert, there is also awake. Awake does not necessarily mean alert. Awake just is kind of the non-sleep, one could say. So the word for not sleeping, or not being unconscious sleeping, even though sleeping one can also be conscious when lucidly dreaming. So one could say alert and less alert. So there is basically maybe a baseline intelligence one has, and this might be the average intelligence one is able to put out into the world. But of course now many tests are taken in the early parts of the day. So if I take a test which says, okay, I'm this intelligent, or I have this mark in this exam, but then 3 years later I actually have to do something in the late part of the day, and I also did the calculation before, but now it is now it is just a different time, so I'm more tired, and I would have still the same capability, then I actually don't have this skill which this test says I have, because, well, it's the later part of the day. So what I'm trying to say here is that, to a certain extent obvious, but there are periods in which I'm more alert and less alert. And by basically altering my life in a way that makes me more alert on average, I can basically have more usable intelligence. So my baseline intelligence, however one wants to measure this, is kind of still the same, but by increasing my intelligence, which seems to be the main constraint on basically all the things I do, not all the things I do, but on many of the things I do, and in general one could say on the things I do. Of course, if I want to have a higher VO2 max estimate, for example on Garmin, I can just run through it or something like this. Basically, intelligence would maybe be not so much a constraint if I had more bodily power, so to speak. But over the long term, if I am able to, with more intelligence or being more alert with my normal intelligence, basically use this intelligence more, then I'm able to find these different things, and these different things might result basically in overall a bigger increase in my VO2 max, which then results maybe in a lower mortality or predicted mortality, or there is just a correlation with people who have a higher VO2 max, and then also a lower mortality. So health maxing seems to not only be about, okay, I just want to be as healthy as possible, but about using the things that are given as good as possible. And because health seems to be the main constraint basically on how high I can go. And in the last couple of years, I have been able to drive sometimes very high compared to the average otherwise me, but I also often drove very low, where I am not even able to calculate like a simple mathematical calculation in my head, because it's just like my body is just like, or my mind or my subconscious is just like, oh well, we forgot what you told us before. So health maxing therefore is basically bringing, so the body, this might also be something additionally necessary to say. I think of now the mind as kind of a program as created by the body. The body is created by evolution, and it seems to be the most complex thing known to us at this point in time in the universe, which is also kind of ridiculous, not specifically my body, but the human body on average. So if one takes this into account, and when one sees this like this, and one sees, or basically after I had this initial thought of, okay, I'm just a program, I'm just kind of an employee, like the kind of CEO of a company. I can't be fired at any point of the day. If I'm tired, I'm basically almost fired. Now, if I am unconscious, then I'm not there. So during the night, of course, I might lucidly dream, but my body has the ability to fire me. My body is kind of the owner. I'm kind of the CEO. I can do things, but I also have to make sure that the owner is always happy. Now, the owner can take basically my job away at any point of the day. There might be some things that I can do to prevent this, like writing up something which might keep me in my job for another, let's say, 8 hours by drinking a cup of coffee. But at the end of the day, my body can just say, okay, you're gone. And I might be re-employed or something like this. There might be many different analogies one could additionally draw. What I'm trying to say here is that I am a program. If I run any app on my phone, if I run any app on my computer, then of course the program is dependent on how much performance the computer has. And if there are 16 other programs that are running, then maybe I don't get that much processing power. And the more powerful the hardware actually becomes, the better the program actually also can run. Now, there might be a certain limit to what the program actually needs, but I would gladly take more resources, I would say. At least I would assume that with more resources I could do more of the things I actually want to do. So if I upgrade my hardware to a certain extent, let's just continue using the computer analogies. If I switch from a notebook to actually desktop PC by increasing my VO2 max by maybe, let's say, I can increase in the next 10 years my VO2 max further, not only by a couple of points, but I'm now at 59. I only 1.5 years ago was at 52. And apart from one drop, I was able to continuously increase it to now 59. If there is a day in the future in which I open up my Garmin dashboard and my resting heart rate is lower and my VO2 max is higher, and let's say a few other markers like these, a few compound markers like these are better, let's say my body fat is also lower, and things like these, or my sleep scores are on average higher, then I'm probably in a better state compared to right now. Of course, there could be additional things that kind of are happening despite these markers being this good, but if one finds markers like these, maybe even better markers, let's just say, okay, the biological age calculation I am using with the gym I'm using, if I have a biological age that is lower, then probably to a certain extent, if these markers which are already mentioned, like VO2 max, like resting heart rate, is going into this calculation, if I'm stronger, if I am more endurant in terms of my heart, so my heart is also stronger, there is, I think, just not really a way in which if I exclude other diseases and things like these, which don't show up in these markers, but then again, the point of finding a marker like this is that it includes ideally as many of the things connected to health as possible, then I think I would just also be better in terms of how much System 2 can use compared to System. So if System 1 is able to generate basically a better System 2, that would be me then I'm probably just better in all the ways I can be. So basically, if the hardware is better, then probably the software that is running on it might not necessarily be better, but at least it has more resources.